Okay, so Leeds Survival Ed Crisis Service was set up in 1999, so just over 20 years ago, and it was the result of some service users campaigning for 5 years locally to have an alternative to hospital, an alternative to A&E, somewhere to go that wasn't clinical. And the initial, so the organisation is called Leeds Survival Ed Crisis Service, the survival ed bit meaning that everybody, I mean, we're informed by the survival ed model, but everybody who works and is involved in the organisation identifies as having their own experiences of mental distress. I think peer-led is a similar term. I think they're quite similar. They get used interchangeably. Dial House was the first service, so it's a nice building. It's 18th century house, and it is a house. It's a large house. It's not a mansion. It's not a clinic or anything like that. And it's the rooms are painted vibrant colours, orange, yellow, lilac, and there are lots of armchairs and sofas. And so people come in, we send taxis out to them on the day that they get in touch and they want some support. We would send a taxi out to them and they come in, and we just make them at home, hopefully give them a warm welcome when they turn up at the door, make them a cup of tea, show them around, show them a smoking shelter, which is a very popular part of the premises, the heated smoking shelter in the garden. And then give them some one-to-one support, which is person-centered. We consider ourselves a person-centered organisation. So the big thing about that being that it's non-directive. It's not, we're the expert and we're going to tell you what to do to make yourself better. It's, tell us why you're here, tell us about yourselves, what do you need tonight? So.
That's great. Well, I think you've kind of answered my next question, which is how do you support people in extreme states? And because this organisation, our organisation, is focusing more on that thing we call psychosis, is there anything in particular you might do? And I agree with you, we're not into labels, but that's the kind of area we're focusing on this evening.
Yeah, sure.
So anything else you'd like to say about that?
How we actually support people?
Or someone, yes, that was in a real extreme state.
Yeah, well, if I may, I'll give an example of somebody that I supported quite a lot in the past.
Yeah.
So as I say, we try not to use labels. In fact, I think because this was when I started volunteering there in 2008, it was my first entry into the world of working in mental health. And I didn't know what a lot of terms meant. And I think I'd been there a couple of years before I understood what psychosis was. But I'd been working with people that heard voices from day one, pretty much. So this particular gentleman he's a similar age to me, maybe a few years older. I felt very natural sort of connection to him, but he was besieged by horrendous voices accusing him of really terrible things, which he found incredibly distressing. And on top of this, he was convinced that gangsters were just outside his windows, ready to break in and to get him. It was clear that he could hear them. You know, just from his body language and everything about him, you could tell that this was definitely going on for him. But I couldn't hear them. So with him, my first usual step would be, well, with anybody, my first step would be to try and understand their experience. But because I couldn't hear anything that he was hearing, how was I then going to communicate the empathy for what was going on for him? But to look at him, you could see that he was really terrified of what was going on. But there was also an element of him looking at me and trying to work out if I believed him as well. So I'd reassure him that, you know, I believe this is going on for you. I can see how terrified you are, but I can't hear anything at the moment. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe you. So that always seemed to me to be a really important part of the building the relationship, because the relationship we've always found is the key to de-escalating people's crisis. I think if people are in the grip of what's the language that we use? A psychotic episode, perhaps.
Some people use that.
Some people might use that.
Yeah.
Yes, as I say, this is not the language that I would use normally.
No.
But in the grip of any crisis, our approach is always to connect with them first. And in connecting to us, hopefully we are a bit grounded. That enables them to connect to themselves a bit more, to connect to the environment. as I said, it's a really nice, relaxing, homely environment. It's very cozy. And that's one of the things that people like about the space. Anyway, I digress a bit.
No.
So yeah, so I'd reassure him that that I believed it was going on for him, and sort of try and ascertain as well that just how he was feeling. You know, he really believed that people were going to break in the windows at any second to get him. And then when we'd this wouldn't take long, this kind of phase, we'd establish some kind of rapport and he'd kind of relax a little bit. And then we'd talk about other aspects of his life, and he'd even laugh about some anecdotes from his past. And then again, we'd maybe go back to the voices at some point when he'd hear something. And thinking back, something that I think is very important, when people are experiencing things through senses, that it's not a shared experience with someone else that's in the room, is to let them know when you can hear or see something. So for example, Dial House is an old building and the walls are quite thick and quite solid, but in some rooms you do still hear doors slamming or people downstairs crashing plates sometimes if they're making some food, that kind of thing. And I would say, someone just slammed a door downstairs, or the sound of voices in the back garden, because the room that I used to support him in a lot was looked out to the back garden. And I think that almost provided a kind of like a benchmark for him, and he was able to kind of gauge, okay, so those sounds maybe are real, but these other ones, they're definitely going on for me, but they're not, these aren't people about to jump into the room and get me, for example.
Yeah.
So we'd sort of flip between those two things.
Yes, no, that sounds really interesting. So one of the things I think can be really difficult with an organisation like yours, as I understand it, you've been going for about 20 years, is that right?
Yeah, 21 years.
Yeah. How do you do that? That is incredible. So how do you actually sustain the organisation, both for the people there, because it can be very difficult for people to keep working there, and financially? And you've got 2 minutes to do that, Barry. Sorry.
Okay.
Flashing thing.
Yeah. Both financially and kind of emotionally, you asking?
Yes. Yeah. The volunteers or whatever. Yeah.
Well, okay, so we're funded. I mean, so most of the people that work there are paid workers. We have volunteers on our telephone helpline. That's mainly staffed by volunteers, but there's still paid staff there overseeing it. Within Dial House face-to-face service that I manage, most of the staff are paid. We have a couple of volunteers, but not many. So we are funded by the NHS, by a clinical commissioning group, with the remit of, I think it's to prevent worse happening, and to support people to better manage their own crises. They're kind of two of our outcomes that we're paid for. You can translate it a bit, say we're paid to keep people out of hospital. That's kind of a big thing. So we kind of monitor that. We do quite a lot of monitoring. We like wordy feedback, and we get people to write things, and the feedback comes in all forms, like poetry, a lot of kind of journal entries, people talking a bit about their life and how useful they found it using our service. A lot of regular questionnaires, things like that. And this is the kind of things that it seems that the NHS really like, is to hear the voices, the words of people that have used the service and how helpful they found it. We also we had a fantastic chief exec for 15 years. She's just recently gone on to sort of bigger and better things, if you like, but she worked incredibly hard and was incredibly successful at building up our profile. She worked a lot nationally, and helped to drive kind of our philosophy around the country, and there are a lot more services now that are open, partly as a result, I think, of her involvement and her commitment to the work and passion.
That's great, but I've just seen one question come in that you might be able to answer at this time, and it was, how do people access the service?
Okay, so we're a self-referral organisation. So Dial House itself, we've got other bits and pieces that have opened now, but Dial House itself, you would contact us on the night that you want support. So we're open from 6 p.m. till 2 a.m. So this is, I'm talking not in COVID-19 times.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, let's think back to a more beautiful time and hopefully a more beautiful future. People would phone up or text us at 6 o'clock when we open. A worker would take a short referral from them, basically just try and connect with them. What's going on for you at the moment? Can you tell us anything that you think we need to know? Why would it help you to come here tonight? That's the sort of thing we want to know. Then we have a short meeting. If we weren't busy, then we'd just invite everyone in straight away. But because we're always oversubscribed, we have a short meeting and try and work out who we think is most in need that evening. And then call the people back, send them a free taxi. People usually arrive about 8 o'clock. So we open at 6, do all the admin. People arrive by 8, and the last taxis would leave about 1:30. So people could have kind of like 5 odd hours in the building, relaxing, socializing, as well as getting an hour's one-to-one support from a worker.
And they have to live in the Leeds area, don't they? I believe they have to have a Leeds postcode.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's precisely it. Yeah. Yes.
That's absolutely brilliant and spot on. Thank you so much. Such a lot in such a short space of time. Brilliant.